3 keys. Is there a worse army to fight than a Druge army? Sir Fundon meant the question rhetorically, but the others considered it carefully. I hate fighting the Jotun, said Dornisdale after some thought. They just don't stop. They're relentless. You can put them down, and there's a good chance if you aren't fast enough with the heart strike, they'll just snap back up to their feet like one of those rocking toys and be trying to cut you in half with those massive axes, screaming incoherently the whole time. I hate it. I like people to stay down when I hit them. Dorgla was already shaking her head in disagreement. Now, the Jotun are bad, but the Grendel are worse. They use your own tactics against you often as not. The Druge are bad, but they're disorganised. They'll run off as soon as face a band of armoured knights. Mind you, that's sometimes because they know you'll chase after them so that they can lead you into an ambush and kill all of your friends. The War Witch paused, staring into the fire for a moment. Her hand strayed to her rod, and from her expression it was clear that she was far away in space and time. She rallied herself and went on. But the Grendel are worse in a way because they're ready for you. Disciplined, careful. And there's a good chance they've worked out what your plan is and are already taking measures to ruin it. There is a greater enemy than any we can fight, interrupted a quiet voice. Sir Fundon startled. He had forgotten there was a fourth figure sat with them. The herald had said nothing for several hours, just sat quietly on the outskirts of their company gazing at the campfire. It is the darkness of the soldier who has lost their way. It is the shadow of chaos and despair they cast. Greater than the death of flesh is the death of hope, and against this peril we can never surrender. The others shifted uneasily in the quiet that followed. Dornisdale had the feeling the herald was not sharing their own thoughts, but quoting someone or something. Daugla licked her lips and cautiously broke the silence. Actually, my friend, in the Empire, hope is considered... The herald stood up in a single motion and turned slightly away, the firelight glinting on its silver scales. I apologize if I spoke out of turn, it said, its voice low and surprisingly musical. Clearly you have a lot to talk about. I'll leave you to your thoughts. I want to observe the changing of the perimeter guards again. Will you excuse me? The servant of the Tidemaster waited patiently for them to excuse it, and then strode off into the darkness towards the palisade. The others exchanged worried glances, and it was a little while before they shook off the suggestion of something ominous and returned to their banter. Overview. During the autumn equinox, as a consequence of the potent enchantment laid across the Empire, the General of Day offered 3 boons. The Empire chose to accept all 3 of those gifts. The first boon was an invitation to the Imperial Warcaster and the War Mage to each select an Imperial army. With the permission of the General, Zakalwe would send heralds to travel with that army, observing it in action and assessing its strengths and weaknesses before presenting a proposal as to a way that army might be honed. The armies selected were the Bloodcloaks and the Golden Sun, and Zakalwe sent heralds to fight alongside them during their campaigns against the Jotun in Skalan and against the Druge in the Barrens. They have duly proposed ways to hone these armies, to change their special quality to Wound Biter and Golden Juggernaut respectively. The second boon was a proposal to work with the Rod and Shield to identify opportunities to enhance existing fortifications, and perhaps locate places where new defences might be prepared. This has led to several more proposals concerning the city of Mead and the town of Sarkham in the Marches, Rumour's Rest in Necropolis, the Spires of Dusk in the Barrens, and the flat, defenceless lands of Segura in the Brass Coast. The final boon involved gifts for the Imperial Warcaster, provided the Imperial Conclave interdicted the practice of instilling the Empire soldiers with murderous savagery. So pleased is Zakalwe with their response that the Eternal has offered a minor boon to Imperial magicians during the winter solstice, making it a little easier to empower their soldiers with the strength to fight their enemies. Honing the Bloodcloaks. Delphisius the Polemarch of Strategy offers an option on how to improve the Bloodcloaks. The crimson mantles worn by the Bloodcloaks are a byword for the heroism inherent in the path of the Grimnir. Almost a century ago, the army was destroyed during a disastrous retreat from Otkadov in the reign of Empress Brannan, and though their skein was not forgotten, it was only recently their red banners were raised again. Despite initial opposition from the Imperial Senate, the army was finally reformed during summer 382 YE. Delphisius, polemarch of strategy, observes that the Bloodcloaks enshrines the philosophy of the Grimnir, battlefield healers who do not themselves fight, but focus on preserving the lives of their peers. Battlefield healers are a valuable resource, obviously, their courage is obvious, yet the army only really comes into its own in a defensive context. Delphisius opines that this is because too many of the Bloodcloaks' resources are needed to protect the healers, meaning they tend to place them behind the lines rather than at the forefront of the fighting. Again, understandable, but it limits what the army can achieve. The polemarch presents a proposal to train and equip warriors whose entire purpose is to protect the healers, allowing them to venture into more dangerous areas. It builds on an old, near-forgotten Wintermark tradition of Skilden, a warrior who would carry a shield to protect a Thane, Banner-bearer or Grimnir. Each healer in the Bloodcloaks would be accompanied by a warrior ready to give their lives if need be to ensure their charge is able to work their healing arts without interruption. Where possible, these Skilden would also be trained healers to support their charge, but this would be secondary to their primary goal of fighting off anyone who tried to harm the healer. There's more to the proposal, such as establishing quick setup and breakdown hospital camps, making the procedures for getting injured warriors to a healer more efficient, improving the logistics whereby physics and apothecaries receive herbs and create potions, expanding training around triage of the injured and the like. But training the Skilden forms the backbone of the proposal. Making the change. Upgrading the army requires 30 wains of mithril and 20 wains of weirwood. The general of the army must submit an appropriately worded order and have the materials in their inventory. The opportunity is available for the next year. Putting Delphisius's proposals into effect will require some investment. It will take 30 wains of mithril and 20 wains of weirwood to train the first of the Skilden and put some of the logistical changes, mobile hospitals in particular, into operation. The Bloodcloak's quality will permanently change to Woundbinder. To make the change, the general of the Bloodcloaks would need to ensure the materials were in their inventory and include in their army orders a line indicating they are implementing the changes proposed by Delphisius. Their quality will change, and the new order will be available by the start of the next event. Delphisius's help is needed to implement the ideas. They have promised to make themselves available at any point needed before the Winter Solstice 386 YE. After that, the opportunity will expire as the Herald will no longer be available to assist. Woundbinder can use the Tend the Fallen order when defending, can use the Recover the Lost order when attacking. A Woundbinder army consists of a large number of trained physics, apothecaries and magical healers. Many of these healers follow the Grimnir tradition, facing the danger on the battlefield but not themselves fighting. Every healer is paired with a Skildren, a warrior whose focus is on keeping their charge safe at all costs and helping them to move to where the fighting is thickest so that they can employ their arts to aid their fellows. The force excels at using medical skills, establishing mobile field hospitals and applying principles of triage to save those who can be saved. After implementing changes proposed by Zakalwe's polemarch of strategy, the newly reformed Wintermark Bloodcloaks would be the only army to possess this quality. The army qualities read as follows. Tend the Fallen. The ability of this army to defend territory is reduced by a fifth. All casualties suffered by this army are reduced by a fifth. All casualties suffered by allied armies in the same territory who are taking defensive orders are reduced by a tenth. The army establishes mobile field hospitals and supply points while ensuring allied forces are accompanied by talented physics and soldiers trained to support them. Medicinal herbs are gathered and healing or defensive positions distributed to officers. The army focuses on moving casualties away from battlefields, patching them up and returning them to the front. Recover the Lost. The ability of this army to capture territory is reduced by a fifth. All casualties suffered by this army are reduced by a tenth. All casualties suffered by allied armies in the same territory who are taking defensive orders are reduced by a tenth. The army establishes mobile field hospitals and supply points while ensuring allied forces are accompanied by talented physics and soldiers trained to support them. These healers remain near the front lines, moving where the fighting is thickest and their skills are most in demand. The army focuses on treating casualties on the battlefield, meaning they can return to battle as quickly as possible. Focusing the Golden Sun. The Golden Sun are the oldest of Dawn's four armies. For many they exemplify the nation, proud knights in heavy harness with swords and shields, always ready to fight. On the battlefield they are like mobile dreadnoughts, shrugging off blows that would down anyone else, pressing through to where the fighting is fiercest and laying their enemies low. For centuries they enjoyed a friendly rivalry with the Hounds of Glory. Now that army is no more, they fiercely protect their reputation and their sacrifice. In recent years, inspired by the army's victories and urged to seek glory through service to Dawn, thousands more Yo-folk requested to join the Dornish armies, and the Golden Sun was their first choice. As a consequence, the Golden Sun became the first large army in Dornish history. Ketos, Polemarch Quartermaster of Zakalwe, observes that the Golden Sun, nobles and Yo-folk alike, are often significantly better armed and armoured than many of their allies. The Yo-folk who are drawn to the army are often veterans who are re-enlisting for the second or third time and are often more experienced than the noble knights in the realities of warfare. The dull logistics that allow an army to operate as opposed to the moment-to-moment cut and thrust of glorious battle. The Herald also observed that since the sacrifice of the Hounds of Glory, the traditional rivalry between the two armies has metamorphosed into something else. There are few people in the Empire more keen to commemorate the Hounds and to defend their good name than the soldiers of the Golden Sun. With these facts in mind, Ketos proposes that the Dornish army might be as effective at protecting their fellow warriors in defensive campaigns as they are in seeking their own glory. Equipping the Yo-folk with the tools and supplies needed to ensure Golden Sun encampments are well fortified, and at the same time as training knights in mobile defensive tactics, equip them with armour that makes use of the properties of mithril and orichalcum to provide them with harness that is lighter without sacrificing any of its strength. They could gain a potent new order that recognises the sacrifice of the Hounds of Glory. Making the change. Upgrading the army requires 50 wains of mithril and 100 ingots of orichalcum. The general of the army must submit an appropriately worded order and have the materials in their inventory. This opportunity is available for the next year. Putting Ketos' proposals into effect will require some investment. It will take 50 wains of mithril and 100 ingots of orichalcum to equip the Yo-folk with fine building tools and provide sun-gold armour to the knights in support of more mobile tactics. To make the change, the General of the Golden Sun would need to ensure that the materials were in their inventory and include in their army orders a line indicating they are implementing the changes proposed by Ketos. Their quality will change, and the new order will be available by the start of the next event. The Golden Sun quality will permanently change to Golden Juggernaut. Ketos' help is needed to implement the ideas. They have promised to make themselves available at any point needed before the Winter Solstice 386 YE. After that, the opportunity will expire as the Herald will no longer be available to assist. Golden Juggernaut. Can use the Blinding Advance order when attacking. Can use the With Bodies and Steel order when defending. The Empire has one Golden Juggernaut army, the Golden Sun of Dawn. The knights are caparisoned in sun-gold armour and alloy of mithril and orichalcum that improves mobility but sacrifices nothing in terms of defence, allowing them to move quickly to where the fighting is fiercest and either destroy their enemies or come to the aid of their allies. Veteran Yo-folk establish well-protected armed camps and armoured supply lines while also fighting behind the knights with a variety of weapons that help them meet any challenge. The effect of the orders is this. Blinding Advance. Casualties suffered by this army are reduced by 3/10. Casualties inflicted by this army are reduced by 1/5. The army advances, consolidating every gain before moving forwards. When they move, though, they move decisively and with force. They don't shy away from engaging the foe, relying on their heavy armour to endure enemy attacks, forcing fatigued opponents to fall back in the face of their unbreakable resolve. With Bodies and Steel. The ability of this army to defend territory is reduced by 1/10. All casualties suffered by this army are reduced by 1/5. 1/10 of casualties suffered by allied armies in the same territory taking defensive orders are allocated to this army. These extra casualties are further reduced by 1/2. The army supports its allies in defence, establishing well-armoured encampments, sending Yo-folk to support baggage trains and supply lines and knights to fight alongside the other armies wherever possible. Their heavy armour and unbreakable endurance allows them to bear the brunt of the opposing forces, shielding their allies and blunting the thrust of the enemy attack. The Walls of Mead. Emperor James is best known for his programme of fortification across the Empire. The recent invasions of the Marches, which have seen both Mornwald and Bregisland occupied, and Mittwold threatened, are of particular interest to the heralds of Zakalwe. They tour the fortifications in Mornwald, visit the Sutton stone quarries, and then ask to explore both the fens of Bregisland and the walls of Mead. Nearly a decade ago, the Empire undertook a programme to reinforce a number of locations, championed by Bridget Talbot as Senator for Mittwold. Of the 3 locations affected, Sabella is currently threatened by Cold Sun, and Melfort has been converted to a rest spa for tired merchant princes. The heralds believe the work done on the walls of Mead, however, would provide a sturdy foundation from which to expand the protection. There is some interest among the Alders Council of Mead, fuelled partially by a genuine interest in securing the city in the face of the dredging of the Gullet, and partially by a long slumbering jealousy of the walls that surround the cities of the League. The proposal of Zakalwe is that the work be completed but also expanded slightly to take into account the more navigable waters opened by the dredging and the enlarged docks. The walls would be extended across the mouth of the river with a massive sea gate that would allow actual cargo ships to enter and leave the city precincts. The plans require 65 wains of white granite and 195 crowns in labour, but thanks to the work already done, would take only 6 months to complete. Once finished, Bridget's Walk would be a rank 1 fortification. There is support for the project among many elders of the city. They have proposed that the fortification be called Bridget's Walk in recognition of the contribution made by one of the most popular senators of Mittwold in recent times, in Mead at least. Provided it is, they'll contribute almost half the money needed to build the fortification, reducing the cost to 100 crowns, providing the work is begun in the next year. The increased security offered by the fortified port, coupled with the opportunity to hire mercenary ships to protect trading vessels operating from the city, would encourage traders from Faradon to send their own goods back to sell to the people of Mead. The elders, who would be purchasing the most of the trade goods, have suggested that someone be appointed to oversee the trade. They suggest that a title be created, Alder of Mead, who would receive guaranteed rates on the purchase of metals and fine Caton swords, providing they were an Alder themselves, and the title had the responsibility to represent the interests of not just Mead, but all market towns of Mittwold. The Third Pie. If the Third Pie were built at Southmoor, it would create an opportunity to protect the entire territory from incursions. After the 3-decade occupation of the Mormor by the Jotun, the folk of the southern marches raised concerns about the Orcs' returns. They proposed 3 fortifications be built, and while the Imperial Senate commissioned 2 of the castles, Farstrider's Watch and Landskeeper's Bulwark, they balked at the prospect of a 3rd fortress in Mormwald. The heralds of Zakalwe, perhaps surprisingly, point out that the Third Pie, as it is occasionally referred to, might be a suitable investment for the Senate to make if it wishes to protect the Mormwald from Jotun raids. The town already has some reinforcement, and there are some remnants of the original fortress built by the Jotun that might be incorporated into a set of sturdy walls and a radial ring of watchtowers. The proposal is about more than just a fortress at Sarkum, however. Recent events have shown how vulnerable the Mormwald is to the Jotun. Barely 6 months ago, Jarl Hakon returned to the territory, establishing hidden caches in the Southmoor, leaving the entire Mormwald vulnerable to invasion. It's entirely likely that they might be able to make similar preparations in Greenmarch, and perhaps Alderley. Inspired in part by the recent Marcher decision to support the Beaters in protecting the Marchers and by the establishment of the Bailiff of the Downs, the plans drawn up by the Heralds and Marcher members of the Rod and Shield involve establishing a series of towers and hidden sanctuaries around the borders of the Morn, supported by armories at the new fortress, Farstrider's Watch and Landskeeper's Bulwark. The project would require 50 wains of white granite, 30 wains of weirwood and 240 crowns. Thanks to existing structures and investment in Sarkum, the work would take 9 months to complete. Once complete, the new fortress and the 2 established ones would support beaters and local folk in scouring the territory for Jotun incursions, ending them where possible and escalating the problem to someone who can deal with it where they can't. This would remove the under-threat quality from Southmoor. In addition, as long as all 3 fortresses were under Imperial control, it would make it impossible for the Atun to create the under-threat quality or a similar one that would ease invasion anywhere in the Mormwald. Any attempt by an attacking army to use an order that makes it easier to create a beachhead, such as those used by the Bear Who Swims, among others, would be ineffective, defaulting instead to a balanced attack. The Orcs and the Alders. It is apparently quite normal for the Atun to build multiple fortifications in their lands. After some discussion, a number of prominent Marcher Orcs in the Mormwald have liaised with Alders across the territory to support the Herald's proposal. As long as the Senate commissions the 3rd fortification and names it Sarkum Pie as a reminder of the events that led to the need for these castles, they would be prepared to provide 1/3 of the labour needed, essentially donating 1/3 of the crowns needed to complete either version of the proposal. Raising the seawall. Upgrading Rumour's Rest to rank 3 would also allow it to protect Long Beach and Sanctuary Sand as if the fort were in that region if they attack from the sea. Rumour's Rest was built in Corsmouth as part of the project to fortify the entire southern coast of the Empire. It is a proudly impervious structure, a gleaming white fortress accented with red and black marble, reflecting the colours of its namesake chapter. At the moment, it is all that stands between the Grendel and the treasure-filled tombs of the necropolis. Unfortunately, while it is well positioned to protect against a direct assault on the necropolis, it is nowhere near as effective at protecting Long Beach and the trade hub of Crown's Key to the west, or the beaches of Sanctuary Sand, where the first highborn ships reached the shores of their new world. The Grendel could establish a beachhead with comparative ease. The fortification would make it a more difficult proposition, but they would not actually take any losses from the fortification until after they had secured the beaches. The Heralds of Zakalwe proposed to change the situation with a program of expansions for Rumour's Rest, greatly building up its defences, coupled with the establishment of seawalls, watchtowers, bulwarks and sea bells along the entire coast of Necropolis, overseen by the garrison. The project is quite white granite intensive, as they wish to preserve the beauty of the original fortification, something that takes a few members of the Rod and Shield by surprise, but they are quite adamant. Their proposal requires 120 wains of white granite, 30 wains of mithril and 450 crowns. It would take a year. At the end of that time, Rumour's Rest would be a rank 3 fortification, but crucially it would also protect Long Beach and Sanctuary Sand as if it were in that region if they were attacked from the sea, for instance by a force involved in a shore offensive. That means its effective strength would be doubled to resist an attack from the sea on the 2 coastal regions. The actual fortification would be in Corsmouth, however. An attack on Long Beach could in theory do enough damage to destroy the fort by killing its garrison, but couldn't capture it unless the campaign conquered Corsmouth. Despite protecting 3 regions, the fortification would only require the normal upkeep for a 3rd rank fortification, 24 thrones. The Eastern Spires. The Spires of Dusk could be upgraded to inflict 20% extra casualties on any attacker. The Heralds of Zakalwe accompany the Golden Sun in the Barrens, but they also visit the territory to assess the fortifications there. One of their number, Copimotea, a polemarch of the cold, seems particularly drawn to the Spires of Dusk. This massive citadel was captured from the Druge following the sacrifice of the Hounds of Glory. While it is in Imperial hands, it is still an unsettling sight. A pair of towers of white granite and weirwood studded with hooked spikes surrounded by traps and deadfalls, and a killing field overlooked by archery posts. The banners of dawn and the standards of the fallen hounds flutter from the towers and battlements, but there is still something intrinsically of the Malum about the structure. Copimotea, Polemarch of the Cold, suggests that rather than resisting the implications of the fortress architecture, the Empire could adapt it to their own purposes. Rejecting the shoddy construction of the pits and traps, the poorly arranged and organised wooden spikes and the haphazardly placed archery posts, the Empire could instead use well-built, carefully positioned traps, spikes and posts. The killing grounds could be expanded, the sally tunnels rebuilt and properly defended to prevent counterattacks, the metal spikes and barbs reinforced with mithril, the grim leering facade enhanced rather than reduced. This would require 6 months of work and an investment of 40 wains of mithril and 120 crowns. It would permanently increase the casualties inflicted by the fortification by a 5th on any force attacking the Plains of Teeth. The Last Hound. Instead, the Senate could remove the Druge defences and remodel the spires to make it a lasting monument to the Hounds of Glory and Dornish power in the Barrens. Not everyone is persuaded by the idea of enhancing the existing Druge traps and defences that protect the Spires of Dusk. It is true that they could be enhanced to make the fortification more deadly for any army attacking the region, but the spires are where the last Hounds of Glory gave their lives to defeat the Druge and conquer the Barrens. Some of the Dornish yeofolk who are cautiously returning to Dawnsguard and Murderdale argue that in light of their extraordinary sacrifice by the Hounds, something more glorious is appropriate for their final resting place. To that end, they propose that instead of Zakalwe's proposal, the Empire could use a Senate motion to completely remodel the fortification. The Druge traps would be torn out and the last traces of their power swept clean. In their place there would be beautiful gardens filled with black roses, each incorporating a number of statues to commemorate the hounds who fell taking the fortification. The name could be changed. After all, dusk is when the sun sets. One troubadour suggests the fortification should be called the Last Hound. The work would not be cheap. It would require 60 thrones to remodel the fortifications and 10 wains of white granite to create statues to immortalise the Dornish soldiers who died capturing the fortification. It could be completed in 3 months, however, and once done it would make the fortification into a lasting memorial to the glory of the Lost Army and a durable symbol of Dorne's determination to rule the Barrens. Removing the last traces of Druge power and replacing them with an imposing symbol of imperial rule would send a clear signal to the Empire and every sept in the Barrens that the territory is now Dornish, now and for the future. The Black Hounds. Sorin offers 4 Black Hounds to adorn the towers of the Spire of Dusk. Enemy armies fighting in the Barrens would disband if their military strength fell below 1,500 or 2,250 if large. The Heralds of Day are not the only ones active in the Empire at the moment. The Fleeting Beat is a herald of Sorin from the Winter Realm who has spent several months sharing its own opinion on the matter of the Omnihedron. When they discover the involvement of the hierarchs of the sea and sand in the matter of fortifications, an area their master is interested in himself, they unexpectedly approach the Rod and Shield to throw their own hat into the ring. Surprisingly, they approve of the plans proposed by the Polemarch of Cold to restore the Spires of Dusk and embrace the Druge innovations that make them such a daunting prospect to attack. They bear word that their master, the Tomb King, is prepared to go further. If the Senate commissions any work on the Spires of Dusk, the Fleeting Beat offers to provide them with 4 statues of wolves, or hounds if you will, fashioned from jet black basalt, each the size of a small house. The Herald proposes to place 1 statue atop each tower, facing outwards so that they look out over the barrens. Sorin's wolves would resonate with the power of winter magic, so that a cold dread would settle over anyone in the territory who thought to oppose Dawn's rule. It would require 25 wains of white granite and 75 crowns to install the Black Hounds, but it could be done as part of either of the 2 options for the Towers of Dawn with a single Senate motion, and it would not add any appreciable time to the construction. Alternatively, it could be done by itself and would take 3 months to complete. Once in position, the cold dread the hounds produce would heighten the fear of death and failure among soldiers of any force fighting against the power that controls the fortification. If any affected army in the territory were to lose morale, it would quickly fall apart, splintering into component pieces. Affected armies that are fighting in the barrens that ended the season with a military strength of 1,500, or 2,250 if they're large, will disband. Any army will be aware of the presence of the Black Hounds and their effects as soon as they cross the borders into the barrens. Crucially, the Hounds' effects would focus only on those engaged in fighting against whoever controls the fortification. Merely being in the territory is not enough, meaning it is a vast improvement over the constant oppression of the Druge Miasma in the opinion of the Fleeting Beat. The effect of the Black Hounds would continue even if Sorin were enmitied, lasting until the Spires of Dusk were destroyed or the Hounds removed somehow. The Water Tower. The Empire could fortify Segura to boost herb production in the territory and protect it from raiding. The Zemrys Islanders have extensively settled in the Sobril grasses, but it is clear that these lands are not as fertile as they are used to. Long, dry summers leave the crops parched and water-starved. To combat this, the islanders produced a great work, the Iron Kanat, a system of reinforced irrigation ditches which have transformed the sandy soils of the grasses into productive farmland that rivals the fertile lands of the Marches to the north. After a controversial false start, the Kanat was completed following the summer solstice 383 YE. The Iron Kanat in Segura is an ambitious design that provides water to every farm in the Sobril grasses. It allows the hard-working Zemrys Islander population of the region to produce much more food than they could possibly eat, and allowed the Brass Coast to support a third army. The only drawback was the vulnerability of the system. The works and the surrounding farms represent a valuable target to any plundering army, such as the Corazon. When it was originally proposed, the newcomer Zemrys Islanders proposed that it might be a good idea to build a fortification at the key site where water is drawn from the river. Given the vulnerability of Segura, the territory is a regular battleground between the Empire and the Lysambrian Jotun in particular, and the growing threat of the Grendel, the Heralds revisit the plans for the so-called Water Tower. However, a Rod and Shield member named Amelie Zemrisi Erigo, who has large numbers of family in the area, points to the proposal to build Camcrag in Karaman and discusses their potential in Segura with the Heralds, and together they consider how a similar project might benefit the rolling grasslands. The situation there is a little different. There are fewer roads, but much more open grasslands that raiders can move around with relative impunity. As such, rather than build the water tower in the Sobril grasses, it could instead be built on the Iron Plains. The irrigation channels of the Iron Kanat already extend to the red fields after all. It would provide protection to the entire territory as a normal fortification. Its central positioning would make it the ideal location for an expanded garrison, supported and trained by veterans of the Fire of the South, an army adept at fast and purposeful movement. Coupled with a series of Camcrag, the small fortified positions used by the Faradin to protect their caravans in their own lands, it would allow the water tower to offer a level of protection to the entirety of Segura. Building the water tower in the Iron Plains and supporting it with a series of Camcrag would require 180 wains of white granite, 540 crowns in labour costs, and take a year to complete. The water tower would be a rank 2 fortification, with a standard upkeep of 18 thrones each season to the Senate Treasury. In addition to fortifying the region and protecting the territory, the Corazon, or similar plundering forces, could be countered by the garrison. They would be unable to raid the farms and other settlements scattered across the grasslands, ensuring that such tactics would not impact the people of the territory as long as the water tower were in Imperial hands. It would also serve as a hub from which to extend the irrigation channels fed by the Iron Kanat to the rest of the territory. This would represent a level of investment in the herb gardens of the territory, increasing the amount of marrowwort produced by every resource by 3 each season. Given the presence of the fortification, it would be impossible for an attacking army to damage this great work without first destroying the fortification. Finally, Amelie y Zemrys y Erigo is confident that this additional level of security and access to water would bring more than simply military advantages. The Brass Coast has lost much of its wealth, and Segura is often seen as practically a desert, but this show of confidence in its people, plus access to water for farms and herb gardens, would surely inspire other opportunities to make the dry grasslands flower. Zemrys Islanders. The Zemrys families of Segura are prepared to show their support of the water tower. If the Empire commissions it before the end of the sowing season, i.e. before the end of the spring equinox 386 YE, they are prepared to contribute physically to the task of raising the tower, providing half of the money needed to complete the commission. This would reduce the cost to 270 crowns. The Key of Commitment. The Conclave has interdicted the magical practice of instilling savagery in warriors. In addition to the promised boon, Zakalwe has offered to enhance magic that hones the skills of soldiers. Finally, the Master Strategist requested that the Imperial Conclave consider placing an interdiction on the magical practice of enhancing entire armies in such a way that their soldiers become prone to savagery. The recent enchantment on the Fire of the South would be an example of the kind of thing he's talking about, as might the night magic used to grant the Navarre armies murderous fervour during a recent campaign in Karaman. The Eternal believes that these powers are not good for the soldiers subjected to them, and reflect a commitment to bloodshed rather than victory. During the autumn equinox, Ashbourne Trosk raised such a declaration on behalf of the Celestial Arch. The Conclave agreed, interdicting the practice. In return, Zakalwe committed to providing the Imperial Warcaster with 3 of his crystalline tokens each season, one-use boons that make it easier to perform Clarity of the Master Strategist and Carve the Crystal Guardian. It has gone some way towards encouraging Zakalwe that he may not be entirely mistaken in his belief that the Empire understands that the ends do not always justify the means. At the same time, the Archmage of Day requested a plenipotentiary meeting. The Eternal has declined, but that does not mean he has discounted her words. Further inspired by the call to arms issued by the Rod and Shield, he offers an additional boon to the Empire for its coming battles. During the winter solstice, any coven who uses the Imperial Regio to perform Horizon's Razor Edge, Alignment of Mind and Blade, Blades of Clear Sight, Arete in the Fields of War, or A Perfect Moment, may invoke Zakalwe as they do so. During that performance, any prismatic ink used to perform the ritual counts as 5 crystal mana rather than the usual 3. The only exception is that Zakalwe will not extend this benefit for covens from Varushka, although his heralds are reticent to say precisely why this restriction is in place.